What's going on?
Peter.
I'm Elliott.
Hey, Will.
Hey,
nice
Will.
to meet you.
You guys want to go to my studio? Sure.
Brothers Peter and Will Bjorndal on their way to a John Mouse show
Yeah, John Mouse.
in Detroit.
This is the sculpture studio and painting studio.
In the 1990s, the field of graphic design had an experimental, or maybe more accurately, a formalist avant-garde wing. This was a very good thing.
This is just the rough part of the whole thing. And then what I'll do is I'll cut live action, like some of the stuff that I'm saying.
It was experimental in that it was based on untested
We come
ideas.
from a small town in southern Minnesota, Austin, Minnesota.
Peter Bjorndal is a frequent collaborator with the musician Eric Hellwig, better known as Hot Dad.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mambo number 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everybody in the car, so come on, let's ride to the liquor store.
It's definitely harder because I have like
In mid-January of this year, I received an email from Peter. They were going to be in Detroit for a John Mouse show and asked if they might come by the studio to chop it up.
Oh yeah, right circles. Oh yeah.
I figured I might introduce him to some of the kids around the studio and see what's on their mind.
It's bone to bone, so I'm assuming the entire thing's caveman themed.
Yes, yeah, very much so.
Rory, Brendan, and Sam happened to be in the annex.
Oh yeah, we left them in Cavebrook.
Cavebrook is a TV studio under the directorial leadership of the artist Sam Panter.
I know it hurts when you feel bowled over, written off, turned out.
Rory King and Brendan Lovejoy host the chat show Bone to Bone on Cavebrook TV.
I'm like Jack and the Beanstalk. This is in my backyard all of a sudden. The length, the girth, I mean, you could feed a village, if you know what I mean. The amount of beans that are gonna grow on my grower. But I mean, as a shower, straight up dirt. But as a grower, we could solve issues that are happening.
Your dick's gonna solve...
Like one boner at a time, one country at a time. Is that intensity?
Yeah.
After showing Peter and Will around, we got down to business and I took a look at some of Peter's recent print work, which clearly, in 2018, shows the influence of the 1990s formalist avant-garde. After chopping it up in the studio, Peter and Will took their leave of me, and I got back to work.
Really nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah, you too. And then come back, all right? For real.
In the 1990s, the field of graphic design had an experimental, or maybe more accurately, a formalist avant-garde wing. This movement was experimental in that it was based on untested ideas or techniques and involved a radically new or innovative style. It was avant-garde in that it often questioned the relationship between producer and consumer. Why did the movement die? What were its essential characteristics? And is there some way to resurrect not the look of that work, but rather its primal energy and cultural power? The many forms of 1990s formalist avant-garde graphic design at their core mapped a consistent formal and conceptual terrain. There was a common set of concerns among the many practitioners of this dark art. At its core, the movement, above all else, involved the exploration of plastic typographic form. In this movement, typography became plastic, became twisted and malleable in ways previously unseen. Upon the release of Fontographer in January 1986, the design, production, and distribution of typography became radically democratized and fell into the hands of the hacker amateur. For the first time in history, the movement leveraged the power of plastic typographic form. The deterioration of legibility. typographer brought to the designer a newfound freedom, and with this, legibility itself came under attack. This was one of those absolutely insane moments where a mere 6 to 8 months after seeing a radically new aesthetic and understanding the conceptual motivation behind that work for the very first time within a critique room, you could walk into a Taco Bell, literally walk into a Taco Bell, and see the evidence of those explorations displayed beneath your chalupa on a Taco Bell tray liner. Scott Makala's Dead History typeface is a literal example of this specific dynamic. The poster form is a primary canvas. In the rarefied world of the Academy, protected from market forces, the poster became a primary conceptual device. Complex formal language. Formal explorations entered a death spiral of increasing complexity. The formal explorations in this movement developed into a kind of arms race of increasing complexity, and a Baroque nature took over much of the work. This formal arms race was a dead end in and of itself, and calls to mind one of my favorite metaphors that I tend to lean a bit too heavily into, which is Joshua in War Games, who suggests that the only winning move is not to play. And aphoristic linguistic constructions. Aphoristic language was a major component of the 1990s formalist avant-garde movement. An aphorism is a terse or laconic expression expressing a general truth or principle, or it can be an astute observation. As we see here in Nietzsche's "Under peaceful conditions a warlike man sets upon himself," arguably the greatest writer of aphorisms in history, and the prototype for this type of language is the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. The defining elements of this movement were the exploration of plastic typographic form, the deterioration of legibility, the poster as a primary conceptual device, the development of complex formal language, and finally, aphoristic linguistic constructions. The 1990s formalist avant-garde graphic design movement was born in the critique rooms and studios of Cranbrook Academy of Art and Cal Arts, and was most thoroughly documented by Emigre magazine before bursting into popular culture through Raygun magazine and on Taco Bell tray liners. All right, why did the movement die? What were the factors that contributed to its death? And more importantly, is there an algorithm? Are there a series of steps that we can use in order to resurrect not the look of that work, but the raw power and the spirit of the 1990s formalist avant-garde movement? Inside the bounds of the poster, there's a fixed relationship between linguistic density, the ability for the poster to carry meaning through language, and type size. As type size goes up within the fixed boundaries of the poster, the ability for the language to carry complex ideas goes down. Look, if you're Friedrich Nietzsche or you're a skilled writer, this rule does not hold true, but that's the problem. In the poster, typography wants to be big. As type scale increases, character counts, and subsequently word counts go down. Obviously, there are many factors, including macroeconomic, that led to the death of the 1990s experimental or formalist avant-garde graphic design movement, but one of the major components within the critique room is the simple fact that within the poster form, which was the primary conceptual canvas for much of this work, typography, language, wants to be big. It tends to be large. It tends to want to consume the rectilinear bounds of the poster. And with this, the simple number of words in terms of character count and word count goes down. This creates a situation that favors aphoristic language. Aphorisms are hard. They're exceedingly hard to write. If you look at other videos in this series, you'll find me talking about cognitive expressionism or cognitivism. Basically, what that means is that work should be able to endure and, more importantly, reward sustained cognition. So as the language within the critique room became more aphoristic, became attempted to communicate with an economy of words, with fewer words, the sentiments expressed became simplistic in a way that could not endure sustained thinking, sustained cognition. This led to a kind of full-scale critical attack on the use of language, that type of language within the poster form. This condition in non-commercial work favors aphoristic language and quickly became one of the main factors contributing to the death of the 1990s experimental graphic design movement. So within the confines of the critique room, when the language was subjected to rigorous thought, it fell apart. This drove both typography and the use of language from that critical space. As the decade matured through the 90s, both the pictorial spaces and the typographic explorations became increasingly complex and took on an almost Baroque character. These formal explorations became a kind of arms race that we saw played out in, among other places, the pages of Emigre magazine. This formal arms race was one of the many factors that, in essence, doomed the movement. Emigre magazine number 57, published in 2001 and designed by Experimental Jet Set, represents, catalyzes the full-scale retreat from the 1990s experimental formalist avant-garde program. Is there an algorithm? Are there a series of steps that we can go through to help resurrect the spirit of the 1990s formalist avant-garde graphic design movement? Is it even possible? Typography, technology, language, documentation, and above all else, solving the cognitive expressionist problem are keys to the resurrection of the 1990s program. Is it even possible to explore language in a manner that's consistent with the values of the 1990s formalist avant-garde movement in 2018 in an effective way? Or is the program itself, the language program itself, doomed? The designer Matt Walsh, operating under the name of Dr. Cobra, is an example linguistically of a practitioner who effectively explores aphoristic language. One of the most important elements in the algorithm to help resurrect the spirit of the 1990s experimentalist graphic design movement is documentation itself, is the creation of a culture of documentation around experiments that are similar in spirit. In an upcoming episode, I will go into depth regarding the steps necessary to help resurrect the spirit of that program. I want to hear what you think. You don't agree? Put me on blast below. Send me comments or questions to my email address or right below. Also, it would do me a great favor if you shared the video and or hit the like button. Till next time.